What unfolds when one of Hollywood's most respected actors goes head-to-head with a seasoned political commentator who believes he can pin him down on national TV? What you're about to see isn't just another celebrity interview gone off track, it's the moment Denzel Washington decided he was done being patronized. The result: a raw, unfiltered exchange that will make you question how far journalism has strayed from its original purpose. But before we dive into this unforgettable showdown, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Trust me, this one will stay with you. It was a typical morning at the Good Morning America studio in Times Square. Crew members were bustling about, prepping for what was expected to be a standard promotional segment. Denzel Washington, appearing to promote his latest directorial effort, had arrived early, as he always did, gracious, courteous, and utterly professional. His film had already generated buzz as a potential awards season favorite, and expectations for the interview were straightforward: a chat about cinema, creativity, and the actor's evolving career. George Stephanopoulos, the veteran anchor, was in makeup, reviewing his talking points with his usual focus. Though the official rundown listed questions about Denzel's film and his body of work, George had another angle in mind. He had recently come across some of Denzel's public comments concerning celebrities speaking out on politics, and he saw an opportunity to stir debate, or perhaps provoke something more dramatic. The two men greeted each other cordially before the cameras started rolling. But even in those early moments, an undercurrent of unease was noticeable. George had a look in his eye, the same steely gaze he used when preparing to grill political figures. Once the show went live, George wasted no time diving in. "Denzel, before we get into your latest project, I want to touch on some remarks you made recently about actors and politics. You said something about staying in your lane, can you explain that?" Denzel's smile faded slightly. This wasn't part of the outline they had agreed on. Still, he kept his tone composed. "What I meant," he began, "was that public figures should think carefully about how they use their influence. It's important to distinguish between sharing an opinion and pretending to be an expert." George leaned forward, clearly ready for a deeper confrontation. "But isn't that a bit contradictory? You've spoken out on social matters before. Are you suggesting that actors should only speak when their views line up with yours?" Denzel's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "I'm saying that reflection is important, especially in public discourse. And unfortunately, that's something we don't see much of these days, especially in the media." George raised his eyebrows, now openly confrontational. "Are you implying journalists don't think before they speak? That's a strong allegation for a news program." "I'm not accusing," Denzel said, measured and steady. "I'm observing. And one thing I've noticed is that some media outlets seem more concerned with manufacturing conflict than uncovering truth." The air in the studio grew thick. The production crew, accustomed to countless interviews, could feel the tension spike. George's smile became strained, his posture tighter. Interesting, coming from someone who's portrayed more than a few morally ambiguous characters. "When you played a corrupt cop in Training Day, was that a social critique or just sticking to your role?" Denzel's eyes sharpened. "When I step into a role, I'm telling a story. When you sit in that chair, you're supposed to deliver facts. The difference is, I don't pretend my characters are real. I'm honest about what I do." George bristled. "Honesty. Hollywood talking about honesty is rich. You people love lecturing America while living in luxury." For the first time, a flicker of anger passed through Denzel's calm demeanor. "Luxury. George, do you know where I come from? Do you know what my childhood was like? I didn't grow up with anything handed to me." "Well, you've certainly done well for yourself now," George cut in dismissively. "Private jets, million-dollar homes, easy to make comments on real-world struggles from behind those gates." Denzel leaned in, intensity rising. "You want to talk about being disconnected? Let's talk about news anchors who've never known hunger, who've never had to fight for survival, pretending they understand hardship because they covered it from a safe distance in a temperature-controlled van." The silence was deafening. Production assistants were frozen, unsure if they should cut to commercial. But what was happening was too riveting to interrupt. George, clearly losing his grip, tried again. "You have a massive audience. Don't you think that brings a responsibility to rise above entertainment and contribute meaningfully to public discourse?" "My responsibility," Denzel responded with a dangerous calm, is to be authentic. To be honest with myself, with my audience, and with the work I do. I don't need lectures from someone who twists interviews into clickbait. You call this clickbait? George snapped, his tone now aggressive. I'm asking real questions. The people watching deserve to know where you stand. No, Denzel shot back. They deserve journalism. They deserve truth, not a theatrical performance masquerading as an interview. The shift was visible. George, flustered, was no longer the composed anchor. He had interviewed world leaders and survived political battles. But facing Denzel's calm strength, he was unraveling. I've been doing this for decades, George said, voice raised. I know the difference between asking questions and putting on a show. Do you? Denzel asked quietly. Because what I see is someone who came into this room with a plan. And now that plan's falling apart, and you're scrambling. George tried to regroup. I just want answers. No, Denzel said firmly. You want sound bites. You want me to slip up so you can make headlines. And because I'm not cooperating, you're getting agitated. The camera crew instinctively tightened their shots. They knew this was gold, TV history in the making. Maybe the problem is you can't handle real questions, George sneered. Maybe Hollywood spoiled you so much, you forgot how accountability works. Denzel stood, but not in a rage. He stood like a man making a choice, to no longer sit across from someone he couldn't respect. You want to talk about accountability. It's showing up every day and putting in the work. It's knowing who you are and not compromising. What you're doing here isn't journalism, it's provocation. George scoffed, but the tremble in his voice betrayed him. This is a news show, not a red carpet. And I'm not here to be a spectacle, Denzel replied. George looked desperate now. Let's talk about your past, Denzel. The people you've associated with. The choices you've made. Let's see how you handle real scrutiny. That's when the room dropped a few degrees colder. Do your worst, Denzel said, stepping closer. Because when you live with integrity, you don't fear being examined. But can you say the same, George? George looked stunned. Are you threatening me? No, Denzel said. I'm warning you. If you're going to dig into others, make sure your own record is clean. Because people are watching, and they'll ask why a respected journalist tried to tear someone down on live television. George backpedaled. I wasn't making threats. I was pointing out that public figures face scrutiny. You were threatening because you were losing, Denzel responded. Bullies always turn to intimidation when logic fails them. But I've dealt with bullies my whole life. I know exactly how to handle this. You're twisting my words, George said, nearly gasping now. This was supposed to be about your film. It still could have been, Denzel said. You made it personal. You started this. Desperate to regain control, George forced a smile for the camera. Well folks, that was certainly a spirited conversation. We'll be right back. But Denzel wasn't done. No, George, this isn't just about spirited conversation. This is about how we treat each other. About respect, and about professionalism. George turned toward him, the mask completely gone. You call this professional? You standing over me, playing the victim. I'm not playing anything, Denzel said coolly. I stood because sitting here felt like I was participating in something dishonest. And I'm no victim. I refuse to be. George launched one final, flailing insult. This is exactly why people hate Hollywood. You think you're above everyone. But challenge you even a little, and you break down. Denzel's smile was cold now. I'm still standing, still answering your questions. You're the one falling apart. Why don't we just reset? George pleaded. Let's start over. No, George, Denzel said, shaking his head. You don't get to do that. You don't get to slander me and then pretend it was all a misunderstanding when it backfires. George's voice dropped to a whisper. Please. This is live. We can fix this. We could have had a real conversation, Denzel said. But you turned it into a trap. And now, you're stuck in it. Denzel unclipped his mic, placed it carefully on the desk, and with calm finality said, I came here to talk about stories, about film's power to inspire. Instead, I was met with ambush tactics. The audience deserves better. I deserve better. He turned and walked off set. George stood frozen, reputation in ruins. The cameras were still rolling. As producers shouted in chaos, George finally turned to camera and whispered, "We'll be right back." But nothing would ever be the same. Within hours, the internet was ablaze with support for Denzel and criticism of George's conduct. Commentators across media dissected the exchange, labeling it a modern media cautionary tale. Because in that studio, on that morning, the world watched Denzel Washington demonstrate what real strength, real professionalism, and real integrity look like.